Well, welcome to the 6 of 6 videos looking at risk statements and based on Chapter 5 of Wheeler's most excellent book on risk management. And what we're going to be doing during this last video is expanding what we covered in the previous video, where we were looking at quantitative analysis and we looked at 5 different approaches. And so what we'll do during this video is actually map that into and against the different phases in the information security lifecycle model. Now, there are lots of problems with using QA tools, and a lot of that has to do with the complexity of the security and to a certain degree the inability to measure certain aspects of information security. But we're going to give it a good run, and let's see where we go. So let's start with some background information. The paper uses the information security software development lifecycle model based on these 6 steps. So you've got an investigation stage, analysis, logical design, physical design, implementation, and maintenance. Very, very common to what you would see in the software development lifecycle model as opposed to an information security lifecycle model, and common to what we covered back in Chapter 2 in the risk management lifecycle model. A lot of the steps are similar. And you can see in that summary component what where you've got a mapping to different areas that relate to information security. So again, this shouldn't be too much of a stretch. Go ahead and pause the video if you need some time to digest everything, but it's pretty logical in terms of its decomposition and in terms of moving from determining what the problem is, analyzing the environment and the problem, coming up with a logical design for possible solutions, coming up with a physical design for those solutions, actually implementing that, and then maintaining it over time. So now what we're going to do is map into each of these phases the quantitative tools that can aid in accomplishing that. So let's start off with that phase 1. And as you can see, we're going out, we're trying to develop our project processes and objectives, maybe even our scope, the objectives are associated with it. And so linear programming, PERT, and critical path management, all of those are going to be tools that are going to work very well here. And not surprising, it's also going to help with the development of budget and other resources that are needed, people, space, time, money, to accomplish a particular task. As you move into phase 2, analysis, you're going to have to look at current threats, controls, and then arrival and potential services. This particularly applies when you're looking at availability. And what the author suggests is that queuing theory, as well as simulation, linear programming, and decision trees are going to assist in that phase 2. Part of that is doing that risk analysis, but again, all of those kind of make logical sense. As you move into phase 3 and you've moved out of analysis into logical design, the same types of tools, linear programming, queuing theory, decision trees, are all going to apply. And you can see some examples there in terms of determining the security blueprint, looking at formulating a mathematical problem if needed, looking at continuing or outsourcing, that's a decision, making an evaluation of possible choices are feasible, again, not a decision, and not surprising that linear programming and decision trees would be good fits for that. As you're actually selecting the technologies in phase 4, linear programming kicks in again. Phase 5 is the implementation, not helpful because you're not making decisions. But in phase 6, you've got to look at the maintenance of the overarching system, and you may come back as you're making decisions to use some of the previously mentioned quantitative analysis processes. Here are going to be 2 different examples of this, taking it and looking at it from a different nuance. And in this case, we're looking at access control issues at a government agency facility. And again, queuing theory makes sense, linear programming, PERT, and decision trees, and you can see the security aspects there. And you can look those over, but again, it makes sense if you're trying to secure a perimeter, how many people you have waiting in line, how far that line backs up, how much time you need to go through the security checkpoints will make a difference. And I've seen places, one of the data centers I ran in Italy, we had 2 different security checkpoints. So you'd have to get, then they were in series, so you'd have to get through the first one before you did the second one, because they were trying to split up that flow and make sure that they had controlled access. The same is true with making decisions about security measures, clearly a possible fit for either linear programming, PERT, or decision trees. Now let's flip this and look at availability. Same thing, linear programming, decision trees, queuing theory are all good fits for looking at the volume of data, the classification of data, and the categories of data associated with that. And so this brings us to the end of looking at this article. And this article started by saying you've got these 5 different ways of quantifying data. We described what those were in the previous, and in this video, we've looked at the information security lifecycle model, the 6 stages there, tried to look at where different quantitative techniques could apply to a different phase. And then we had 2 kind of breakout examples, one of looking at access control to a facility. The second, which is on the screen right now, is looking at availability issues where these tools could apply. And again, this is a continuing move towards trying to mature the processes around decision making as it relates to risk management and as it relates to information security. All right, well, that brings us to the end of Chapter 5. Guess what? We're going into risk exposure in the next chapter. So if you want to think about the last couple of chapters, go back 2 chapters ago. What were we working on back there? But we were working on those kind of assets. We then moved into risk statements, and now we're about to go into risk exposure. So keep on studying, keep on learning, and I look forward to seeing you in Chapter 6 as we move into risk exposure.